We begin today the Gemara on Daf Pei Tes Amud Aleph, lines down from the bottom, from the top of the Amud. So in the Mishnah it said Mokim Shenogu Lomud Begasa Chulu, that in a place where the custom is that they measure in large measuring cups, so you're not supposed to measure in small ones, and the same thing in the opposite. And all the halachas the Mishnah said also about measuring. So here there's a siman in the Gemara for many of the halachas that the Gemara is going to teach here in connection to this. Simen, ein ma'ainen, ve'en goitchim, ba'gardemen, ubelitra, shloisha, ve'esa, nefesh, mishkolois, memachik, ova, leitasu, leyasa. Tana Rabbanam, we learned in the Braise, minayin, she'ein moichkim, b'mokim she'goitchim. How do you know that you're not allowed to level it out in a place where the minig is that they sell a heaping measure? And the opposite as well. Ve'en goitchin, you don't sell heaping b'mokim shemoichkin, in a place where it's leveled out. And the Rashbam explains heaping is when it's godush. It goes over the top of the keli. So the Rashbam explains that the Gemara is speaking about a case where the buyer or the seller are meichel. They say that we know this is the minig, but we're ready to be meichel to do it differently. But still, even if they're meichel and they're accepting it, you still should not do it this way. Talmud Laimas, we learn from what it says in the pasuk, Eifa Shleima. That you have an Eifa, it should be Shleima, complete. That extra word Shleima says that you always have to do it complete the way the minig is. Now,
what's the problem if you goyish?
Then it comes out that the seller is the one that's losing. He's giving more. That's what we learn here. Even if you're meichel, you shouldn't do it. And the Rashbam explains the reason is because if you do it when they're going to be meichel, then other people are going to think that you can do it without being meichel, and other people are going to start doing it against the minig. So therefore, you shouldn't do this. And how do you know? If he comes and says, that I'm going to level it out in a place where they usually sell heaping. And the seller says, and because of this, I'll charge him less. I know I'm doing different than the minig, but I'm going to charge him less. Or I'm going to sell him a heaping measure in a place where they level it out. And I'm going to charge him more for this. So in such a case, there's less of a concern that people are going to learn from this to start doing different than the minig, because they see that over here you're charging him more or less because you're changing from the minig. But even in this case, how do you know that you still don't listen to the seller to sell differently than what the minig is? It says the word vitzedek, that's adding that even in such a case, when you're taking off or adding to the money that you're charging because you're doing different than the minig, but you still should not sell this way. Tana Rabbanon, and another brayse we learned, basically a very similar halacha to this. How do you know that you don't sell when you weigh on the scales, that it should be exact in a place where the minig is, that they tilt it a little bit in the favor of the buyer? And you're not allowed to sell it when you tilt it in the favor of the buyer in a place where the minig is that they sell and they weigh that is on the scales exact. Talmud Laima, we learn from what it says, Evan Shleima, that you should sell Shleima, meaning according to what the minig is, and don't deviate even if he's meichel. And further, again, we say, What's if the seller says that I'm going to sell exact, even though the minig is to tilt in favor of the buyer, but I'll charge him less. And I'll tilt in favor of the buyer, and I'll charge him more. Still shein shemeloi, we still don't listen to do different than the minig. Talmud Laima even shleima v'tzedek. That the added word tzedek says that you always should follow by the minig, so people should not come and do it differently and come to deceive the buyer or the seller. Amar Rav Yehuda Misura.
It's different than before?
It's the same kind of halacha. Before it was talking about how you fill it, if you level it out or you have a heaping, and here it's talking about the scales. That when you have to tilt it a little bit in the favor of the buyer, or it's exact, which the Mishnah spoke about. But regarding this halacha of selling honestly, Amar Rav Yehuda Misura, the pasuk says la yilacha bebeischa. So the simple pshat of the pasuk is saying that la yilacha bebeischa efa ve'efa g'day l'ktana. You should not have in your house different weights, large and small, and you use it in a way that you deceive a buyer. So the Gemara says that you can read it as follows: la yilacha bebeischa. You will not have in your house, meaning a person does not have what he needs. Matam, why is he poor? Mishum efa ve'efa. So because you deceive people and you have different weights, so therefore you will not end up having what you need in your house. Similar, when the pasuk says "Layilecha bekischa," you will not have in your pocket. So again, the simple pshat is you should not have, but he's explaining the pasuk that if you will not have what you need in your pocket, matan. What's the reason for this? Mishom even ve'even, because you have different stones that you use to weigh and you deceive people. Aval, Even, Shlema, V'tzedek, Yilach, what the pasuk is saying is, and also Eifa, Shlema, V'tzedek, Yilach means that you will have. If you wait for people and you sell honestly, then you will have everything you need. Tana Rabbanan and Abraisi, we learned regarding these words, Yilach, which are extra words, the pasuk didn't have to add. These words, what is it coming to teach Yilach? Melamed, this teaches us, Shemamidin Agardamin, Lemidais, that you have to appoint agardamin, which are officials or officers that should make sure to inspect people's weights, that they have honest weights. But ve'ein mamidin agardamin l'sha'arim. You do not appoint any officers or any officials that will come and check to see that the prices that you're selling are the right prices. The Rashbam over here explains the reason is because when it comes to weights, you can deceive people, so you have to have someone to inspect them. But when it comes to the price, if you raise the price, then someone else will lower the price and the customers will go elsewhere to buy cheaper. And that will force you automatically to lower your price. The way it works in the system of capitalism. Okay, so the Gemara is soon going to discuss that there could still be a problem, but according to this opinion, regarding prices, it's not necessary to have someone to go and see, to make sure that you're not raising the price. Now, the Beyu Nesiyeh, by the house of the Nasi, Oikimu Agardamin, they did appoint a person to inspect both Bein L'Midos and Bein L'Shadim, both regarding the weights that were used and also regarding the prices. Amalei Shmuel L'Karne, so Shmuel says to Karne, Puk Tani Luhu, go and teach them what we just taught here in the Braise, that Mamidin Agardamin L'Midos, V'Mamidin Agardamin L'Shadim, that you appoint someone to see that the weights are okay, but for the prices, you don't appoint someone. So Nafak Darish Lahu Karna went out and taught them like they were doing that Mamidin Agardim and Bein L'Midos, Bein L'Shadim, that you actually appoint someone both for the weights and for the prices. Amalei, so Shmuel heard that he taught differently than what he told him to teach them. So he said to Karna, Ma Shimcha, what's your name? Karna is his name. He said his name is Karna. So Shmuel told him, if so, typically Karna Be'ene, a horn should come out of your eyes. And this is what happened. Nafak le Karna Be'ene, a horn came out of his eyes, which means that there was some growth that came out of his eyes because he taught differently than what Shmuel told him to teach. Okay, but the Gemara here brings though that what Karna says is a different opinion. There's also a source for what he said. V'io kaman sova. Karna himself, according to whose opinion did he hold that he said this? That you do have to set, and you have to have people that are inspecting to see both the weights and the prices as well, because the people that deceive. And the Rashbam explains that it's not enough to say regarding prices that if you higher the prices, then the people are going to go somewhere else that are selling cheaper, and therefore it'll force you to lower your prices. Not necessarily. This person will wait until all other people that are selling this item sold out, and now you'll higher the prices because you have the monopoly. Tana Rabbanon, we learned in the Braise, Hoye mevakesh mimeno litra. If someone wants to buy from you something in the weight of a litra, so sheikalei litra, you weigh for him and you give him a litra. If it's a chatzi litra, if it's a half litra, sheikalei chatzi litra, you weigh for him a half litra. Revia litra, if it's a quarter, sheikalei revia litra, you weigh for him a quarter of a litra. So the Gemara explains, my kamash malon. What is this Braise teaching? It's obvious that you weigh and you give according to what he measured and whatever the weight is, what he's buying. And says the Gemara, the masakninon maskeli ad hochi, that you prepare these weights only until this amount. So one shot of the Rashbam is that it says here that you prepare weights down to the size of a quarter of a litra, but you don't make smaller than that. Once you make smaller than that, then it's easy to cheat people with it. It's very small. People don't see exactly the difference between one and another once they become very small. Another pshat that Rashbam says is that it's saying here that you go a full litra, half litra, and a quarter litra. But you don't make other sizes in between sizes. If you start making in between sizes like a third of a litra or a fifth of a litra, then it becomes confusing for people, so you could easier cheat people. Tana Rabbanon, Braise we learned, Haya mevakesh mimenu shloisha rive litra. If someone wants to buy 3/4 of a litra, so you don't have a weight that's exactly that size of 3/4 of a litra. So what do? So lo yoimaloi, you shouldn't say to him, shkoili shloisha rive litra achas achas. You don't say to the seller, so wait for me, a quarter of a liter at a time. And then together, if you do it 3 times, you have 3/4 of a liter. You don't say that, because every time he's weighing for you a quarter of a liter, because it's very hard to weigh exact, he's going to give you a drop extra. So if you're weighing it 3 times, you're going to get a drop extra 3 times. So the seller ends up losing a little bit here. Ella, rather, what you do is shekel litra, you're weighing it the amount of a litra, and since you only want 3/4 of a litra, what you do is umaniach revia litra ima basar. Together with this meat, which is only 3/4 of a litra, you put a weight, which is a quarter of a litra with the meat. So now you have a full litra, and you're able to weigh it against the weight of a litra. Tana Rabbanan, in a brayse we learned a person wants to buy 10 litrin. You shouldn't say to the seller, shkoili achas achas, that weigh for me 1 liter at a time. And and then each time that he gives you, that he weighs for you 1 liter, he's going to have to add a little bit extra to be sure that it's the right amount that he's giving you. Ella, rather, kulam bava basra, you weigh the 10 liter all at once, and then he only gives you a drop extra that one time that he weighs for you. So he doesn't have to give all the time, then the seller would lose. Tana Rabbanan, in a brayse we learned regarding a scale. This is the scale that the Gemara is going to speak about here is a scale that's hung from the ceiling. So now nefesh miznayim, this is the center, or I think it's called the fulcrum of the scale. That's the center of the scale where you place that pole, the horizontal pole into it that goes across, and then the scale has the cords that hang down from it, and then from these cords hangs the pans that you weigh on it. Okay, so now the nefesh of the miznayim, that center of the scale, on the top of it, where you put that pole in it, tluya ba'aver, it should be hanging down from the ceiling into the air, gimel tfachim. It has to be hanging lower from the ceiling at least 3 tfachim. Or gevayim in haaretz shlosh tfachim. If it's something that's on the ground and it's lifted, it's raised off the ground, how much does it have to be raised off the ground? 3 tfachim. The point over here is that when you're measuring, you have to give some space to be able to, when you tilt it, that it should have space to go up or space to go down. In order to have that space, you have to have 3 tfachim. Now the Gemara will explain soon that we're talking here about a scale where you measure large things, and because it's large things, so when you're tilting it, as we said before, that you have to tilt it a little bit in the favor of the buyer. So because we're talking about large things, so you have to have that space to tilt it 3 tfachim, and therefore either 3 tfachim of space from the ceiling or 3 tfachim of space from the floor. Okay, that's this large scale that you're selling large items on it. Now, v'kone umisne, the length of that horizontal pole that's on the top of the scale, and then the misna, which are the cords, shalah, that hang down from the pole, shnei masat tfachim. It should be 12 tfachim. Okay, so now there's a machlokes here. According to the Rashbam, what this means is that the pole itself is 4 tfachim, and then the cords on one side are another 4 tfachim hanging down, and the cords on the other side is another 4 tfachim hanging down. So together, that's going to be 12 tfachim. That's Rashbam's pshat. Other Rishonim say that the cheshbon doesn't work if it's so short. If you have this pole that's only 4 tfachim, that means that the pole hangs out on each side only 2 tfachim. That's a tiny pole. It doesn't work out. It doesn't make sense to tilt it with such a small pole. So others say, when the Gemara is there are Bnei Gershom, other Rishonim say that the 12 tfachim here is just the length of the pole itself. That has to be 12 tfachim long. Now v'shal tzamarim, v'shal zagogin, if this is weights, or a scale rather, that's being used for someone that's selling wool, or a glass maker that's selling glass. So these are smaller items. Tluya ba'ave shnei tfachim. There has to be a space if it's hanging from the ceiling, only 2 tfachim. Or gvayim in haaretz, if it's positioned on the ground, it should be above the ground, shnei tfachim, 2 tfachim. The kane umisna shalah, and the pole and its cords that are hanging down is 10 tfachim. It's going to be 9 tfachim. And then you have an even smaller scale, v'shal chenveni, v'shal balabayis, the scale that's used by a storekeeper or a private person that's selling. Tluya ba'av, it has to hang from the ceiling, tefach, 1 tefach. This is basically like what it said in the Mishnah, when you tilt it, so then you have to tilt it a tefach in favor of the buyer. Or gvayim in haaretz tefach, it's raised up off the ground, also a tefach. The kane or misna shalah, and the pole and its cords is shisha tefachim. It's going to be the size of 6 tefachim. Now here you have a very small scale, v'shal tortani, the scale of a tortani, which I believe is people that are selling jewelry. Yeah, is that what it is? That have these very small scales. So tluya ba'avir, it hangs in the air from the ceiling, shalish etzpais. It just has to have a space of 3 finger breadths, or above the ground 3 finger breadths. And the Kana Misna Shala, and the Braisa says regarding the length of the pole or the cords, any idea. The Braisa says that he doesn't know what the shear for this would be. Okay, so now the Gemara explains the first case of the Braisa. It didn't spell out what kind of a scale we're talking about. What is it being used for? In all the other cases, it mentions specifically what it's being used for. What's the first case? Now, the first case of the scale, what kind of a scale is this? Rav Papa says the Yagrumi. It's a scale of Yagrumi. Rashbam says here this is basically a blacksmith that sells in big pieces of metal or items like that are large, and therefore has to be at least 3 tfachim a distance from the ceiling or from the ground. Rav Mani bar Patish said, Kederech she'omru li'inyan isurin, just like it says here, these shiurim regarding how a scale should be used, and the size of all parts of the scale, how far it's from the ceiling, and then how big the rod or the pole has to be, and the cords, and all of these shiurim that it says here regarding isurim, that you should make sure that you should be able to use it properly. Kach omru li'inyan tumasan. The same is also regarding the halacha of tumeh, that if you have a scale that is not this kind of size and it's not positioned in a proper way, so then it can't be used. So if it can't be used, then it's not a keli and it won't be makabel tumeh. That's the Rashbam's pshat. Taisus over here says it doesn't mean it's not going to be makabel tumah at all, because it still is a keli. It has the pans in it is a keli that can be makabel in it something. But it means that the cords that are holding it or the pole that's holding it, if the pans could be used properly, so then there's a halacha by tumah that's called yodois of tumah. When you have a handle of tumah, that it's also makabel tumah. But if it can't be used properly, then the cords or the pole are not going to be a yad for a tumah, so it's not going to be makabel tumah. So the Gemara asks on this that Rab Mani said, "My kamash malon. What is this chiddush? Tanina, we learned this clearly in a Mishnah Masechta Kelim. It says there, chut miznayim shel cheveni v'shel balabatim, that string that the scale is hanging, if it's hanging from the ceiling, how large does that string have to be? In other words, how far down does it have to hang from the ceiling? Tefach has to be this, has to go a space of a tefach down from the ceiling. So it's exactly what it said before in the Braisa, that it has to be a space of a tefach from the ceiling. So why does Mani have to say that the same halacha applies regarding tumeh if it says it clearly this way in Masechta Kelim? Answers the Gemara, Kone u'misna shelo itzrich, that true, this detail about the space from the ceiling, that there's no chiddush. It says it in the Mishnah, but as far as the size of the horizontal pole and the cords, that shear, all the different shiurim that I mentioned here, that's why he's saying it's compared to that, because the loitnan. That doesn't say in the Mishnah, the halacha, what it is. Regarding tumah, that's why he was saying it's compared to this as well. Tan Rabbanan, in a Braisa we learned, Ein oisim mishkalois, you don't make the weights, loishal ba'atz, not from tin, v'loishal avar, not from lead, v'lo yishel gisterin, and not from, gisterin is, again, from what? What are they translated there as? Alroy. Okay, which is some kind of mixture of metals, yeah. V'lo yishel sham minimatchis, or not any other kind of metals. And the reason for this is, the Rashbam says, these are things that will deteriorate over time. It gets chipped, and therefore it won't be an honest weight. You can make it from a rock that is a very hard rock that doesn't chip, and or also from glass that remains intact. If it breaks, it breaks, but you can see what it is. We learned in the Braisa. Now this is going back to the halacha we said before, in a case where you're selling and you're filling up a measuring cup, that if you want to sell it, when you level it, so what kind of a utensil do you use to level it out? Ein oisen hamachak, so you don't use this leveler to level out when you measure in a measuring cup, so you don't make it natural delas, not from a delas which is made from some kind of vegetable or gourd, because it's too wet, it's too light. So when you're going to level it out, it's not going to be leveled out properly. It's very light. So it's still going to be like heaping a little bit. But you shouldn't use something really heavy like metal, because then it's very heavy and it presses it down too much. Aval oiseyu shel zayis. So, but what do you make it from? You make it from a piece of wood, from an olive tree, or shel egois, from a nut, from a walnut tree, or shel shikma, a sycamore tree, or v'shel eshberoya, or the other guess here is eshkeroya. What is it with a chaf, which is from boxwood tree. That's something which is not too heavy, not too light, that you can use it to level it out. And another Braisa we learned about the leveler that you use for this, You can't make this leveler tzido yechad of, that one side of it should be thick, v'tzido yechad katzer, and another side will be short, because then you can use it to your advantage when you want to make it, when you want to level it out more. So you use the thicker side or the thinner side. And also, now the way that you level out, you shouldn't do it like with one quick leveling, because if you do it this way, so then it doesn't level it out properly. If you level it out very quickly, then it's bad for the seller, and it's good, it's for the benefit of the buyer, because he gets extra here. And on the other hand, though, you shouldn't level it out very, very slowly, like a little bit at a time when your mamish taking off a lot, because then it's bad for the seller, and it's good for the again, it's bad for the buyer, that is, and it's better for the buyer. You're taking off more. Now, so in other words, the way you have to level it out is, Rash Bamir says that the way you have to level it out is, or either you level it all at once, but you level it very slowly. You're not too quick, not too slow, but you're like a regular pace. Or you level out one half of it, and then you level out the other half. You do it in the normal way, not too fast, not too slow. Now, Al-Kula, regarding all of these details here that we just learned about how you should be honest in these different things regarding the scale and the weights and leveling, regarding all these things, Amar Rav Yechanan ben Zakkai. Rav Yechanan ben Zakkai said, Oili Emoimer, woe to me if I say the halachas about this, and Oili Emoimer, and woe to me if I don't say about this. And he explains why. If I'll say and explain all the details of what's not allowed, so then Shema Yilmudu Aramoyin. So then the ones that were looking to deceive people hear all these details, and they may use it out to actually go ahead and deceive people. And if I'm not going to mention any of this, so then the ones that are looking to deceive people will say, that the Chachamim are not speaking about this because they're not aware of our ways, and therefore they won't be afraid to go and deceive people. Now, so Yibayaluhu, the Shaila was asked, Amra or Amra. So did Rav Yechanan ben Zakkai teach about this or not? Amra Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. So Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak said, Amra, you did teach all the details. And based on this pasuk, he decided that he should teach it. The pasuk says, "Ki yisharim darchei Hashem." The ways of Hashem are straightforward. Tzadikim yelchu bam. Tzadikim go on this path. Upaishim yikashlu bam. And the sinners will stumble in it. So he has to teach all the details. And if a deceiver wants to take and use it to go and deceive people, so then he will stumble in it. Tana Rabbanan and Abraisa we learned. The pasuk says, "Leisasu ovel." So it says different kinds of things. Ba mishpat, in judgment. Bamidah, in measuring, Bamishkal, in weights, and Bamisura, which is another kind of measuring. So what are all these things? So when it says in the pasuk, one second, Bamidah is also the first thing in the pasuk. Don't do something which is not right when it comes in judging by midah. That's the first thing. So what kind of a midah is the pasuk talking about? Zu mididas karka. When you're using a rope to measure the size of a piece of land. What does this mean? How could you be dishonest when you're using a rope? If you're measuring and you measure for one, let's say you have two buyers that are buying a property in partnership. So you measure for one in the summertime, and in the summertime, so the string is drier or the rope is drier, so it's not going to stretch out as much. And for someone else, if you're measuring in the rain season, so it's moisture and it's wet, so therefore it's going to stretch out more. Or b'mishkal, when it says you shouldn't be dishonest in weights, shalayatmin mishkaloisav b'melach. You shouldn't put your weights into salt, which causes it to become heavier, I think it says, right? Yeah. Okay. And b'masura, what does this mean? B'masura is when it comes to liquid measurements. Shalayatiach, that you should not, when you are pouring whatever liquid it is that you're selling, so if it's bubbling and there's foam, so then you end up giving less because of the foam. Now, v'kal v'chaymer, from this, what the pasuk speaks about, the size of the measurement by the liquids of a mesura, so we can learn a kal v'chaymer from this. Now, ma mesura, what's the amount of a mesura? Shehi echad mishloishim v'shisha belug. It's a very small amount. It's a 36th of a lug. And here, hikpida olav Torah, the Torah is saying that you have to be very careful with this, that even if it's a little bit of foam, such a small amount, and you're deceiving someone a tiny amount, you have to be careful. So if that, from this you understand, if it's lehin, v'chatzi hin, shlishis hin, revius hin, v'lug, v'chatzi lug, and revius, what is the bach out over here? Revius and tuman, and chatzi tuman and uchla. Definitely, by all these kinds of measurements, you have to be careful. Soon the Gemara is going to discuss over here more about what these measurements are. And the next stuff actually also. Okay, so therefore, this is what the different kinds of measurements and weights that the pasuk is talking about. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Asur la'adam sheyashe mida chaseira or yiseira b'tuch beisai. A person may not keep in his house a weight that's either too large or too small that can be used to deceive people. You're not allowed to keep it in your house, even if you're not using it. Even if right now, not only it's not being used, but it's being used as a vessel to urinate in, but nevertheless, it could be possible that it would be used as a weight, so you're not allowed to have it in your house. Now, Rav Papa said about this, Lo Yamaran, this wasn't said, Elo ba'asra de lo chasimi, in a place that you don't have the government officials that come and give you a chaisim, a seal, that these are weights that can be used properly. But if it's in a place where they have officials that give you a seal that this could be used, so then it's not a problem. Because if the buyer, the customer, will not see that seal, he's not going to weigh in it. So therefore, over here, you don't have to be worried if it's not going to be an honest weight. You're not going to get it sealed that it could be used. And furthermore, in a place even where they don't give you a seal for this to be able to be used. So nami lo yamadan, it also wasn't said that you shouldn't keep it in your house. If they don't have inspectors that come and inspect the weights that are used. If they have the inspectors, less lumba. So then it's not an issue to have this in your house. That's what Rav Papa said. But the Gemara says about this, v'loihi. We don't follow what Rav Papa said. Why? Because Zimnin, the Mikri ben Ashmashes, or Mikri v'Shakal. It's possible sometimes that it'll be on a late Friday afternoon, and the person that's coming to buy is not going to pay attention, and he's going to use it even if he doesn't see if it's a good weight or not, if it has a seal in it or not, and you can end up deceiving someone by using these kinds of weights. There's a sikha from the Rebbe in Chelik Chav Zayin and Parshas Kedoshim, where the Rebbe talks about this piece of Gemara. In the simple pshat of the Gemara, it's mashma that the reason you shouldn't keep these weights in your house is because even if right now you're not using it, but you could end up using it in certain times, so you shouldn't have it. But there the Rebbe explains, based on the Rambam, that the reason you shouldn't have it in your house is even if you don't end up using it, but the very fact that you have it in your house, it's a midah of armumius. You're engaging in not good character by having these kinds of not honest things in your house. Even if you don't use it, it's still aser. That's what the Gemara means to say here. The Gemara brings a braisa, Tanya nami hachi. We learned this in a braisa as well. Lo yasha adam mideh chaseira or yiseira b'tech beisa. You should not keep in your house a weight that's either missing, lacking in it, or it's extra in it. Even if now it's being used as a vessel to urinate in. You shouldn't keep it in your house. You should have only honest weights in your house. Okay, the continuation of this braisa with different kinds of measurements that the Gemara is going to elaborate on. It goes down in the next daf. Learn Mitzvah Shem the next time.